Justice League of Discord just posted its September community voted tier list for DC Dark Legion, so we're here to cover that tier list, talk about some of the more interesting takes in the tier list, and maybe discuss how it's different from my personal rankings. I'm always excited for the first of every month because it always feels like tier list season. Everybody's kind of like revamping what their overall impressions of characters are. We're going to jump in and go through those rankings. But first, if you're not already a part of the Justice League of Discord community, we'd love to have you over there. I've provided a QR code on screen that you can scan with your smartphone and you'll be able to join the Discord community. There are no requirements that you join the server. There's no requirement for voting. Obviously, there's a preference that people who vote have the champions that they're voting on built. But the overall purpose of Justice League of Discord is to have a fun community where everyone gets a way to voice their opinion on champions. One thing I always try to lead with when talking with people about this community is there are going to be some discrepancies until we get the community to, hundreds of people who are voting. You're going to have some champions who are probably misranked a little bit, but for the most part, I'm actually really proud of the community for where we have a lot of these champions placed right now. There are a few outliers, I would say, some champions that I probably wouldn't vote where they are. But at the end of the day, we have to rely on kind of the hive mind for this tier list to work. And it's just a really fun experience. And again, a way for you all to be able to voice your opinions in a way that everyone in the community gets to see it. So it's really fun community. Scan the QR code and we'll see you over there. Here we have the tier list for September. You'll probably notice that Chloe has made a couple of modifications to the look and feel of the tier list. I do have it kind of cropped on the screen, but whenever you go download the actual version, you'll see the full art and everything, and it looks really, really good. Loving the color scheme and everything on this tier list. And you'll notice if you watched my personal tier list video last week that I have sort of opted to use the same setup that we're using for Justice League of Discord going forward, where we're voting the Warriors and Guardians in one separate list. We're voting all of the damage dealers in a list, and then we're voting the intimidators and support or healers in their own separate list as well. And I really just like this setup, just making it easier for you to kind of like decide how you want to build your team. I think I'm really happy with the way S tier has turned out on this list. A couple of champions that, as we see new champions come into the game, are potentially falling out of favor. We talked about Superman the last couple of tier lists, I think, where you kind of feel like he's trending down, but he's still able to hold his own in S tier. I think there's just so many different use cases for Superman if you have him well built that he's continuing to stay there. I do believe that if we get another really good single target damage dealer, we may have to reconsider that. So we'll kind of monitor that over the next few months. I'm curious to see how the community voting goes with Superman over time, though. You saw on my newest tier list that I did move Crypto down to A+ tier. I'm standing by that move, but I'm okay with him being here in S tier. There's a lot of people who are really enjoying using him, and he's actually a quite nice free-to-play option for folks who need a solid healer just because of what he does with his kit. The stun is really strong, so I'm fine seeing him in S tier here, and definitely agree with the other healer ranks for S tier. When we get to A+ tier, there's a couple of champions worth talking about. I mentioned this with Scarecrow in my tier list, but he's a champion that just saw a really nice buff to his ability to soak damage, so he's going to have a shield now, and it really does bump, I think, Legion of Doom up a rank in terms of what they're capable of doing in PvP, but also just in general. Any team where you're running Scarecrow, you're going to have a really formidable tank. He's most likely, most people would consider him the best tank in the game, especially now. It's kind of hard to argue against that. We do see Deathstroke continuing to hang out in A plus tier, and I think that's an appropriate ranking for him. Definitely an argument to be made that he's S tier for PvP purposes, but in PvE game modes, I do think there are better options, in particular AoE damage dealers. In my tier list, I've made a designation that for PvP purposes, he definitely goes up a rank. I'm happy to see him still here at A plus rank. You'll see that Superboy moved up from A tier to A plus tier, and I think that's appropriate. He's definitely the best supporter champion, I think, in terms of being able to provide additional attack or damage to the rest of the team. Even outside of a Superman family team, we're seeing Superboy used with a lot of lineups, especially seeing him a lot with Nightwing lineups, but really just anywhere. He's definitely seeing a lot of use, and I think definitely fills that niche a little bit better than Zatanna does. So happy to see him move up into A plus rank. We also see Raven and Ivy here. Now I have my Raven and Ivy ranked in A tier, and definitely some characters that I'm considering moving back up, particularly Ivy because of her vines. I wanted to steer clear of moving her up immediately after the buffs to her kit, but we're definitely seeing more prevalence of Ivy in the meta, and she's definitely a champion that I'm considering moving back up into A plus tier. We're really talking semantics at this point, but glad to see her in A plus tier and thriving. Not happy with the interaction that those vines are now going to have with Superman, who already struggled with the vines, and there are other champions that do the same way. If you're using auto mode, Superman definitely takes a hit in terms of his ability to deal with teams that have Ivy, because he'll go straight for those vines, and if the vines can't be dealt with quickly, it's just going to allow the other team to focus your Superman down and kill him. So we see Ra's al Ghul and Talia al Ghul enter the tier list here for Justice League of Discord at A, and I'm okay with those rankings. In my tier list, I had Talia entering at B tier and Ra's at B tier as well, but with the caveat that in PvP, he's definitely a tier higher. However, I'm actually considering, I'll be releasing probably an update to my tier list fairly soon where I just go ahead and make the adjustment, but I will be moving Ra's and Talia up and then moving Green Arrow down in my tier list, because I think that's an adjustment that really has to be made at this point. Clearly, Ra's and Talia both are capable of much more damage output than Green Arrow, and we're kind of seeing pretty much all of the legendary champions move their way down to B tier or lower. They still have a lot of functionality. We talked about that before. You don't want to misconstrue the fact that a champion is in B tier for them being bad. It's really more they have a really good kit, but there are champions that are better than them at whatever they do. So you kind of have to move them down the tier rankings, just the way it works with power creep and that sort of thing. So I'll be making that adjustment. I like seeing that Ra's and Talia are here in A tier, and people are acknowledging that they are really good champions. In particular, Ra's has proven that he is incredible in PvP. So if you are at the high ranks of PvP, he's a champion that when you get access to him, you're going to want to be pulling for him if you can. Free-to-play players probably want to steer clear of both of the Al Ghuls, I would say. But for spenders, I would say go for it. We see a couple of champions here who are moving downward that I thought was fairly interesting. Obviously, with Black Adam, that one makes a lot of sense. We just talked about that a second ago. I think the legendary champions are just going to continue to see themselves falling lower and lower. Now, obviously, with any sort of mythic ascensions, that's definitely going to change the calculus here. So probably going to be seeing Red Hood ascend to Mythic within the next 20 or 30 days. And when that happens, we'll have to reevaluate the quality of Red Hood and whether he's worth moving up into A tier or higher. So definitely be on the lookout for some changes there. But fine with seeing Black Adam go down. Batman is more of an interesting one to talk about because, I've spent a little bit of time talking about Batman and I have another video coming out kind of showcasing Batman's kit and talking about him a little bit more, but so I want to save some of that conversation for the video that will be getting released fairly soon. But suffice it to say that, you know, obviously they made some changes to Batman's kit to where his Justice League synergy is only 3 tag synergy now, so he's not getting additional damage if he has a full 5 tag Justice League team for his ultimate. But to compensate for that, he does just in general deal more AoE damage on his ultimate without having tag synergy at all. So I think that's worth, you know, thinking about. Obviously, this seems to be a way for them to give him a little bit more Bat Family synergy or more viability in a Bat Family team without actually changing his kit in a more aggressive manner. But really, I would have liked to have seen them leave everything the same on the damage tiers, but make it where it's Justice League or Bat Family. And again, we'll get into that conversation a little bit more whenever I release my full Batman review. But it is interesting to see him falling to B tier. I think he's a little bit better than that. I would still argue that he's potentially A tier. It just depends on what you're using him for. You know, I think there's room in the rankings a little bit higher for Warriors and Guardians to have another champion in A tier. And so, again, a little bit surprised to see him fall. But I'm going to be monitoring the meta for PvP, for combat cycle, and other things to see whether we're seeing any Batmans out there. You don't really see Batman in the PvP meta anyway, especially at the Grandmaster ranking. So, you know, he's obviously not an A+ tier or S tier champion by any stretch, and not going to get there anytime soon unless they do a full revamp of his kit, which kind of feel like they probably should. I mean, he's one of the most iconic champions in the game, so it's either that or give us some sort of a variant of him that is going to be getting used a little bit more often. Well, that's enough to be said for Batman. And then really quickly, you can see that Penguin has fallen down to D tier. I think that makes sense for him. Obviously, I can't find really any uses for him right now because even if you're going to run a full Arkham team, he just doesn't quite make that team. You're probably going to be running Scarecrow and Bane up front, and then you're going to be running Joker, Ivy, and Two-Face for your backline. So really just not any arguments right now for Penguin in the Arkham team, which is unfortunate. Penguin's a really cool character. Maybe if we get another season of the Penguin show on HBO, we might have a chance to see him rise up the ranks, get a kit rework or something like that. Well, that's going to wrap up this video on the Justice League of Discord tier list for September 2025. Looking forward to seeing more of you guys join the server and participate in the tier list going forward. It's a really fun community that we have going right now. Tyvoka is doing a really good job of managing everything, and I want to see this thing grow over time to where, like I said, we're having several hundred people who are voting on it. Let me know in the comments what you think of this tier list. Do you agree or disagree with some of the rankings? And if you haven't already done so, consider subscribing to the channel. And if not, I'll see you in the next video.